December 2nd, 1950. Air Force investigators in New York City receive a letter. In it is this: something discovered on a photo of Manhattan. The photographer claims a shot immediately before didn't show the same cylinder-shaped object. Their name is redacted. But a series of rarely seen declassified files reveal they worked for Underhill Studio, and may have been the owner himself, Irving Underhill. Interviewed by an Air Force special agent, Underhill said the image was used for a postcard. He was one of the city's most well-known architectural photographers. His studio regularly received commissions to promote new buildings through his work, much of which is now in the Library of Congress. He and a colleague tell the Air Force nothing was seen in the sky when the photo was taken, and in their expert opinion, it wasn't a film defect. Considering his stature and the quality of the photo, one would assume officials took the sighting seriously. But that isn't what appears to have happened. It was instead swept up by the notorious Project Grudge, predecessor to Project Blue Book. Edward J. Ruppelt, former head of Blue Book, wrote in 1956, "It doesn't take a great deal of study of the old UFO files to see that standard intelligence procedures were no longer being used by Grudge. Everything was being evaluated on the premise UFOs couldn't exist. Its goal," he wrote, "was to get rid of UFOs by explaining every report." In this episode, we'll ask, is this debunk at all costs approach evident in the strange Underhill photo? And were cylindrical objects seen elsewhere that year? We cover forgotten declassified files. Subscribe to join us. Object on photo determined to be moon caused by time exposure. That was the official explanation for the image. A month after getting Underhill's letter, the Air Force simply concluded this: he must have forgotten the moon was in the sky at the time, and the shape was caused by its declination during a long exposure. There are many issues, all of which we will get to. First, the photographer said the image was taken on May 20th, 1950. But after a visit from a special agent, he changed the date to March 20th. This matters because a waxing crescent moon was present in that part of the sky in late March and was visible for 2 hours that night before traveling below the horizon. Though we must ask, is there any documentation to back up this date change? Underhill usually signed the bottom corners of his photos, and this was no different, though the month written on the Air Force's version is indistinguishable between March abbreviated and May. We aren't going to accuse investigators of altering the print, turning May into Mar by blacking out the lower tail of the Y, but it's worth considering all possibilities. Thankfully, the Library of Congress has another Underhill signature showing his R and Y together. Here's what the Y would look like altered. Did the Air Force change the date from May to March? It certainly was important to their hypothesis. The moon on May 20th, 1950 was days away from a first quarter phase and did not have the necessary curve to match the object in the photograph. But there's more than handwriting analysis here that suggests the official debunking may not have been very well thought out. Take the shadowing on the object. Usually visible with this phase of the moon is a dimmer portion along the inner concave part of the crescent. That's the terminator, the line separating the day and the night side. Underhill's photo, though, appears shadowed in a different spot, on its edge. The concave part of what the Air Force called a crescent is not shadowed, and there are more glaring errors too. The enlarged version of the photo shows the concave edge of the object facing down, toward the horizon. The moon's waxing crescent on March 20th was facing the opposite direction. Perhaps most notably, investigators write the photo was taken between 1730 and 1800 hours. Historical records, though, show the sun did not set until 1806 that day, and there were no deviations in daylight saving time that year. And, more anecdotally, the title of Underhill's photo itself is Night Lights from Queensboro Bridge, something evident in the skyline view itself that the photo wasn't taken before sunset. In fact, twilight didn't end until 1937 on March 20th. maybe the photo was taken in astronomical twilight between 1907 and 1937. And actually, this may explain the glow over the city in the photo. But here's the kicker. If taken that late, the moon should have been out of the frame as it crossed due west around 1850. In fact, this may be why the Air Force asserted the photo was taken between 1730 and 1800, before the sun set. That was the only time on March 20th the crescent moon was in the southwest, the direction the photographer said he was facing. Okay. All of this doesn't explain what Underhill or his photographer saw, but it does severely call into question what the Air Force thinks this is. Even their conclusion the image itself was a time-lapse is dubious. In an interview, the photographer said they weren't sure if an instant shutter or timed exposure was used, though that didn't stop investigators from definitively stating it was due to this. A small squiggle of light they think must be lights from a ground vehicle as it was moving. They didn't ask Underhill what he thought about this theory. And most importantly, all streets to the southwest of the bridge were perfectly linear in 1950, as they are today. They can't account for any vehicle traveling in a loop. Our view is simple. The Air Force's explanation has enough holes in it that it should at least be changed to an unidentified status. Despite, as Ruppelt described, Grudge's goal to debunk UFOs, by the early 50s, reports of cigar-shaped objects were so numerous they became difficult to wish away. T-Ticket, Massachusetts. Just 1 month before the Air Force said the Underhill photo was taken, 2 pilots report seeing a pair of bright cylinders above the town. Neither could identify what they were, despite thousands of flying hours between them. The cylinders were seen maneuvering together, and one dropped a fireball from its body. "I'm familiar with weather balloons," one pilot said, "but I've never seen anything like these objects. Although they operated as a pair, they weren't attached in any way. They climbed at rapid speed and then disappeared." That May, 2 radar operators at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico visually observed a metallic object of cylindrical shape at 3 in the afternoon. It flew forward while angled downward, they said, at tremendous speed. It disappeared in a flash of brilliant white light. As Grudge transitioned to Blue Book, the sightings continued. July 1952. 3 cylinders stacked up vertically between 50,000 and 80,000 feet, seen by 4 different pilots above Pennsylvania. 4 days later, a Navy veteran sees a lone gray cylinder with a domed top and bottom flying upright before flashing silver and disappearing. August 52. An engineer in New Mexico sees 3 cigar shapes sitting motionless in a V formation before moving into a diagonal, tumbling forward as they flew. Ruled unknown. For reasons we can't determine, cylinder UFO sightings generally fell as the 1950s progressed in favor of disc and spherical shapes. Though, like the Underhill photo, attempts to explain everything away continued to pop up in late Blue Book files. Like in March 1967, when a father in Newburgh, New York saw a bright, large object outside his home. It changed shape, first appearing like a toy top and then like a cigar. He called his wife and daughter to look at it. They noted it was silver, extremely bright, and 200 to 300 feet wide with an antenna on top. After 15 minutes, the object became motionless and disappeared instantaneously. An investigator wrote the witnesses were reliable, and though they did live near an airbase, it reported no traffic at that time. The conclusion Blue Book reached? Well, they must have just seen Venus. Apparently, someone in the Air Force felt this didn't make sense. As a handwritten note says, investigator should have asked, "Did you see Venus also?" The family's detailed account, complete with intricate drawings, is in the file, though not analyzed by officials. The deeper we get, we see what Ruppelt was talking about. Even if a trained observer saw a UFO with no natural explanation, there was often no attempt to discover what was truly behind the phenomena. No informed research, theories, or even speculation, and no attempts to correlate sightings together. At least, there is none of this in the public Blue Book and Grudge files. One wonders if other, more classified programs pulled all of this together at a 10,000-foot view, and what conclusions they made. In the interest of national security, it seems naive to think there hasn't been an attempt by the US government to figure out the intent of UFOs, their origin, and why some sightings vary in type to such a significant degree. After leaving Blue Book, Ruppelt concluded his own book in 1956 with this: "I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to what the final outcome of the UFO investigation will be, but I am sure that within a few years there will be a proven answer." 64 years later, we're still waiting. But with the knowledge he was privy to, Ruppelt's optimism is interesting. Is an answer known and it just remains undisclosed? And what would it take for these other UFO files, if they exist, to become public? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And please share this video with your friends and family. Patreon supporters, thank you so much, including John G. If you like what we do, consider joining them on Patreon and help us produce one new episode every week. See you next time.